Empowered Warriors, welcome to episode 15. So today's episode, I want to talk about a very human condition that many of us work through at various times of our life, throughout our entire life, and that is the issue of facing difficult circumstances, going through difficult times. I'm hearing so often lately that life is just really hard and feels hard, and it feels difficult, and it feels like treading water against a strong tide. And I totally get that. And I want to just first of all acknowledge that this is no joke. You know, what we're going through right now in 2020 is no joke, and it's not anything to take lightly. However, I want you to know, and if you listen to this episode, you will really get, my intention is that you'll really get a grasp and really get to know and feel this in your heart and in your soul, is that just because hardness is happening around us, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to take that on ourselves. And in the spirit of it being the new moon, and the new moon happens in Leo on August 18th of 2020, and so when this is released on August 19th, just the day after, we will still be feeling the effects of the new moon. So hopefully you will get to use the content in this podcast to help you move through some of these difficult times using the new moon energy. And I'm going to go into the new moon a little bit, at least what I know about it. I'm not an astrologer or an expert on the moon, but I am an expert in Chinese medicine and yin and yang theory. So I can talk about that in relationship to the moon and the sun and everything in between. So if you want to know how you can improve your life drastically simply by just doing a few simple steps or a few simple things around the phases of the moon, your life can actually improve tremendously. So if you're ready for all this transformation, I invite you to stay tuned. Welcome to the Empowered Warrior podcast. My name is Angela Noel, and I am an intuitive coach, acupuncturist, and Chinese herbalist. This podcast is all about empowerment, meaning how you can maintain your personal power in order to have the best life beyond your imagination. An empowered warrior is someone who has the identity of a person who is healthy, radiant, and free from all suffering, and has the tools ready and available to move through life's obstacles with confidence, ease, and a sense of freedom. In this podcast, I bring over 16 years experience in Chinese medicine, countless years of self-development, and a passion for helping others find their personal power. I will be discussing just a few of my favorite topics regarding health from a Chinese medicine perspective, brain habits, and spirituality, so that you can quickly pave your pathway to freedom and be free from the chains that have kept you stuck. My intention with this podcast is to serve as a guide for warriors who want to form a healthy foundation of body, mind, and spirit, and sustain it by changing who they are being from the inside and having a stronger connection to their higher selves. My goal is to help students end the unnecessary suffering that they place on themselves by having poor health habits, negative thought loops, and a lack of self-worth. I am so happy that you're here. Hello, Empowered Warriors. Again, thank you so much, as always, for pressing play on episode 15. I am, as always, so grateful for you and for having you as a listener. And I say this every week because I really think it's important to express that gratitude and never take a good listener or a good follower for granted, right? So I just want to just express that and know that I appreciate you and I hear you. And if you have any questions or if you have any suggestions for topics or anything about the Empowered Warrior, you can always message me. Probably the best place is on Instagram at I am Angela Noel. And just DM me. Let me know your thoughts. If you have any great takeaways from the podcast at any time, just feel free to tag me and share your takeaways. And I would be so grateful just to hear from you and hear how the Empowered Warrior has impacted you. So today I would like to talk about something that was basically this episode was inspired by a quote that I saw, speaking of Instagram, on Instagram. And the quote there wasn't any credit given to the author, and I did a little searching online to see if there was an author, and there wasn't. So if you know who actually wrote this, feel free to let me know. But what the quote said was, life feels hard either when we are out of our comfort zone or when we choose to remain in our comfort zone. So I would like for you to just think about that for a few seconds. And when I first read it, I was like, damn, that is so true. And that is kind of the basis of what I want to talk about today, and how so many of you, myself included, and so many people that I know, everybody, I think if you're a human being, no matter what time it is, whether it's, 1800s, 1900s, or early 2000s, 2010, 2020, part of the human condition is to experience difficult emotions, difficulty, difficult circumstances. Am I right? So, and I'm hearing it. I totally hear you, and I'm hearing this a lot. And I just feel like it's really important to acknowledge all of you and let you know that I hear you. But it's also really important to have some tools ready and available to get you out of these tough emotional states. Because what's more important, right? Staying in these emotional states for minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, right? I talk to people sometimes that say that they've been resentful to their ex-husband for over a decade, right? Imagine what that resentment does to your body, mind, and spirit. So, what is more important, right? Staying in this state of hard and difficult, or being in this state where you feel emotionally free, where when these opportunities come up for you to process these difficult emotions, you know exactly what to do. And it's not to say, and I feel like, oh my gosh, there's so much out there on social media, and I don't mean for this to be a soapbox, but there's a lot out there right now in the interwebs of people talking about peace, love, and light, and just let it go. And I feel like that's just part of the story. And I want to just be completely candid that people who say that they don't live in tough emotional states or that doesn't happen to them, I don't want to accuse them of lying, but I just feel like sometimes they might not always be telling the truth. Because if you think about that quote, right? When life feels hard, either because we're out of our comfort zone or because we're staying in our comfort zone, right? It's kind of like damned if you do or damned if you don't. You know what I mean? So what I want to offer a perspective for you all so that when you get through these, or when you're in these emotional states, or when you're in these circumstances that feel hard, My intention for you all is to move through these times with grace, like that concept of grace under fire, right? Instead of making your circumstance your life, because you are not your circumstances. Am I making sense here? And I'm going to repeat this. You are not your circumstances. Your circumstances are your circumstances, and you are you. And how you feel every day and how you move through these circumstances is a matter of choice. And you know, I talk about choice quite often, but I feel like it's just one of those underrated, not talked about things where we can choose our emotional state at any time. So with that in mind, with the fact that circumstances feel hard, where life feels hard, and then you have this other side where life is choice, how do we navigate into that in-between space, right? Because we don't want to dismiss how we're feeling, right? But we also don't want to stay in that state. So there's so much juiciness here, you guys, and I really want to dive in. But first of all, I want to just talk about the fact that August 18th of 2020, so this podcast will be released on August 19th, is the new moon. So if you're in Eastern Standard Time, that is 10:41 in the evening, there will be a new moon. And I want to talk about that a little bit and just give you a little information. As I said before, I'm not an expert in the moon. I'm not a lunar expert, but I know enough because it's something that I really pay attention to. I pay attention to the lunar cycles because I do think that there's a lot of information that we can get from the moon that can help us move through life with just a little more ease, or if not, a lot more ease. So the new moon versus the full moon. Now, I know I talked about this in an earlier episode. I think it was episode 3 or 4, one of my earlier episodes where I talked about the moon. And the moon in relationship to yin and yang. So you probably already know that yin-yang balance is very important when it comes to having the life that we want, having the health that we want, having a healthy body, having a healthy emotional state. And when you think of everything in the cosmos, right, from, you know, our existence on Earth and into foreverness, it is really important to have this balance. And when we lack that balance, that is when speaking of our own interpretations and in our human experience, when we lack balance of yin and yang, that's often when we see, and just looking at from the standpoint of an acupuncturist, if we have a deficiency of yin or a deficiency of yang, there's often physiological symptoms going on. So I will save that for another episode. If you want to know specifically more about how yin and yang, how symptoms manifest when yin and yang are out of balance, please let me know, because I really want to know, what your interests are as far as taking this podcast into the future. So if you want to know more about health and wellness and Chinese medicine theory, just hit me up on Instagram and let me know. And again, my Instagram is at I am Angela Noel. So getting back to the moon. So I had an astrologist tell me a few months ago, and I think I said this on a previous episode, that the moon, because of its nature, right? The moon, so if you look at the sun versus the moon, right? The sun is very yang, right? The sun provides all the light, all the heat. It is the source of life. It provides life on Earth. And the sun is also very yang in nature, because of its light, because of its brightness, because of its intensity, because of its heat, because it produces daylight, right? And daytime is a yang time. When we think about when things are noisy during the day, like if you live in a busy city like New York City, is it usually quiet in Times Square at, say, 1 o'clock in the afternoon? Not really. But what about 1 o'clock in the morning if it's not New Year's Eve? How is it going to be noise-wise? It's going to be a lot quieter usually, right? So if you think about that contrast, right? Day versus night, yin versus yang. Yin is more nighttime. Yin is more quiet. Yin is the feminine. And the yang is more masculine. So we actually need that in balance, as I already mentioned earlier. And because the moon is very yin in nature, it actually loves to be a new moon, right? And it doesn't necessarily like to be a full moon because it feels the full moon is very yang in nature for the moon. So my astrologist actually told me, like, the moon is really actually very uncomfortable without all that attention. So that's just a little bit of an interesting tidbit for you. So when it comes to the new moon and how it can help you, the new moon is a time, it's the beginning of the lunar cycle. So in theory, and this doesn't mean that if it's not true, then it's not right? But in theory, the new moon is a time for menstruation, right? It's a time of renewal. It's a time to let go, right? It's like a new cycle starting anew. And whenever it's the new moon, I would say for the last year to 2 years, I have followed the lunar cycles a little more closely. And I have to say that the new moon is my favorite. And it's my favorite because I look at it as an opportunity to let go of what no longer serves me. Because of what I said earlier, because it's like starting over, right? It's a brand new cycle. And personally, I like to do this at the beginning of every week. So I like to do this on Sundays or even like Saturday night. So I can start off, feel fresh on Sunday. Or sometimes I do it Sunday night in preparation for the work week on Monday. And there's no rules here, right? You can do whatever. Like some people like to start their week on Wednesdays, right? So whatever works for you. And if this resonates for you, I do suggest or invite you to figure out some renewal practice that you can have, whether it's using the moon or the days of the week. So I have this little ritual that I do in the beginning of every week and the beginning of every month. And I also do it with the lunar cycle. So getting back to what I was saying earlier about things feeling difficult and hard, this is a time where you can really tune into the energy if you're sensitive to energy, but you don't necessarily have to be sensitive to energy to do this. But this is a really good time, and it's an ideal time to let go of what no longer serves you. So for those of you that are noticing like, oh my God, like, I just want to let this go. Like life feels really, really hard. And I've been hearing this in particular this month. I mean, it seems like, I don't know. I feel like everything, it almost feels like a broken record. Like it seems like every month feels hard right now. Does it not? Every week feels hard. But what you can do is use this time to really go inward and go into the energy of the new moon and figure out. And I said the word figure out. I feel like that sounds so like left brain, like figure out. But what I like to do is just sit in quiet reflection on the new moon. And it doesn't have to be the actual new moon. It can be like 3 days before or 3 days after. The energy associated with the new moon is pretty powerful, 3 days before and 3 days after. So it can be within that 6-day window, but the closer to the new moon, I would say, the better. But go inward and just, set aside, I don't know, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever feels right to you, whatever feels doable for you, even if it's 5 to 10 minutes. And just sit in quiet reflection, light a candle. And what I really recommend doing is getting out a journal and journaling everything. Just kind of like using this journal as to let it go. Right? Like if you want to get really angry in your writing and write really hard and use capital letters or use like a really dark black marker or a red marker, or if you want to like write so hard into the paper that you can see your lines like 4 or 5 pages down, whatever it takes, use this time to just kind of get all of that stuff out, all of that junk out, all of that stuff that's just hanging around in your head, hanging around, just pulling on your heart, creating weight, and write it all down. Are you with me so far? So, quiet reflection, candlelight, journal, right? And this to me, this alone, if I just did this one thing with the writing, it feels so much better. But if you want to keep going, this is what I would recommend. So write until you feel like you can't write anymore. And you might notice some tears. You might notice some anger. You might notice some laughing, some joy. Like the full spectrum of emotions can come out. There's no rules for what can come out here. But I invite you to just be totally uninhibited and preferably by yourself. But if you want to do this with a partner, I think this could also be a really good opportunity to have a ritual with your partner so you could let go of things together. Maybe you do it with your children, whatever feels right to you. So then when you're done with that, what I like to do is I put my hand on my heart. And really just invite expansion in, and I close my eyes and I just allow my breath to, if I was noticing that it was getting a little heated up or maybe I was skipping over my breathing, I just allow all that to settle down when it's ready. And I notice that if I'm forcing versus allowing, and I'm realizing this is sounding kind of like a meditation. It wasn't intended to be a meditation, but you can certainly use this as a basis for a meditation. So just keeping your eyes closed, hand on your heart. I also like to put my hand on my abdomen. And with my eyes closed, I just find that a lot of information tends to come up during this time. And you notice the calming of the breath. And you might notice that you're trying to force things. And if you start to force things or you're like, oh, it's not happening fast enough, that's just an invitation to continue breathing, right? And usually, and I would actually set an intention before you start this. Like I intend to let this go, whatever this particular thing is. So I intend to let this stress that's feeling really heavy on my heart right now, I intend to let this go, right? So just imagine letting all of that go, inviting that to go. And one thing I like to do is thank it, right? Because oftentimes these stressful moments, these difficult emotions are nice reminders for us to grow, right? So there are nice reminders for us to get out of our comfort zone. Or, remembering that quote from earlier, they're nice reminders that we are in our comfort zone. And it's really important to, in my interpretation, to just give yourself the time that you need to do this. Because when you try to rush it, it often feels rushed, right? And what is rush, right? Rush is the ego, right? It's the ego trying to talk you out of doing something. It's trying to talk you out of being uncomfortable for a little while. But I invite you to stay with it and notice what comes up. Notice what comes up. And when you feel that you're complete, when everything that needs to go is gone, I would invite you to just continue to stay with the breath. And what I like to do is have some kind of very tangible experience where I know that I'm truly letting go. So it could be just taking in some really, really deep, dramatic breaths and sighing really loud. Do that as many times as you need. And I just want to caution safety, right? Another thing that I like to do is pull out those pages in the journal, or pull out pages from an old journal, or maybe the entire journal, and throw it into a fire. And as you watch those pages burn, I invite you to express again gratitude. Thank you so much for protecting me. Thank you so much for keeping me safe. Because what are those tough emotions, right? They're keeping us safe. They're keeping us safe from moving forward, from growing. Thank you so much for protecting me, but you can go now. And what that gratitude does is it just invites that flow of energy, right? So I talk about chi a lot, or life force energy. It's this process of surrender and letting go and staying in flow. Because when we resist these emotions, or when we get angry with them, like, oh, why are they still here? Why are they still here? And we don't thank them. We're just creating more resistance, and we're making things, we're basically perpetuating the problem. So this is a very loving, kind practice. It's not only the practice of letting things go that weigh us down and make us feel really heavy and uncomfortable, but it's also a practice in ultimate self-love. Because there is no judgment, there is no forcing, there are no harsh feelings that we have towards ourselves. And when we notice those coming up, this is an opportunity to let it go with love. And one more thing I want to say, and that is when we go through these difficult emotions, and going back to that quote from the beginning, we're going through these tough times or these tough circumstances because this is the universe's way of allowing the space for us to grow. And think about it. Just, I invite you to think about it. My husband and I go back and forth about this kind of thing pretty often. But just consider this for a second. I talked about resistance earlier. But just say you're the biggest disbeliever in this universe talk, right? It sounds too out there or too woo-woo for you. If you're a skeptic and you don't believe about this expansion of the universe and these universal lessons, I invite you to think about it from a very practical perspective. So, if you don't believe that the universe teaches us lessons, where are you going to be in 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is, if you continue to hold on to these very rigid beliefs that things just happen to us, that circumstances just happen to us? Even when I said this myself, like I felt my body constricting inside, like it didn't feel expansive. It felt very restrictive. It didn't feel, I wasn't leaning into the energy of growth. I was leaning into the energy of restriction. And if you're not fully convinced that these lessons come up as opportunities to grow, that's completely okay. You can go ahead and convince yourself later. But for those of you that are just kind of feeling like you're done with living in your stuff, right? I invite you, the next time you go through a period of shadows or a period of rough circumstances or a period of hard, instead of looking at it as, oh, here we go again, like here are the lessons, or however you want to say it, here's more stuff to deal with, I invite you to say, thank you. Thank you. And just by you doing that, by you surrendering and not giving in to this way of being that feels hard, that's going to make your next round of challenges or lessons, it's going to make it that much easier to go through the next time. What you focus on expands. So if you choose to focus on what feels good and what feels in alignment and what feels expansive and what feels like growing and what feels like this is an opportunity for me to get to my next level in my individual growth or in the business, that's where you're going to be. But if you choose to stay in, this is the hard and this sucks and this is rough, and again, not taking away from things being hard because they are hard. But if you continue to focus on the difficulty and things being hard and rough and sucky and awful, then that's what your life is going to be like. Your life is going to continue to be sucky and awful and terrible and hard. And furthermore, if you continue to hold on to these beliefs of hard and struggle, that's not inviting that free flow of chi in your body. And what happens to our physical bodies when the chi isn't flowing, when the chi gets stagnant and stuck? You guessed it, illness. So warriors, there's many, many reasons why it's a good idea to really look at your problems and your challenges as opportunities instead of the opposite. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you found this useful and that you can apply these steps right away. And apologies if it sounded kind of like a meditation in the middle. It's more of an exercise. But if you want to make it into your own individual meditation, feel free. And thank you so much for listening. And I really appreciate you being a listener and for all of your love and all of you that have just given me some really supportive words lately. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day and a very amazing, happy, releasing new moon. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to the Empowered Warrior podcast. It is an honor and a privilege to have you as a listener. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast and would like to help others pave their pathway to freedom, end their disempowerment and suffering, and become an empowered warrior, please share this podcast with your friends and family. Also, it is my intention to help humanity grow and evolve to their highest potential. So if you really enjoy what you're hearing, please help me spread the word by leaving a review in iTunes. Thank you again, and I am so grateful to be able to serve you in this very exciting way.